In this video, we're going to look at putting together our first project for Unit 1, Digital Solutions, looking at creating a simple stopwatch app. So the first thing we need to do when we're starting any project, and I guess this is a good habit to get into, is we should always create a new folder for all the project files, and then also create all of our files that we want to set up. So to create a new folder, it's pretty simple. I'm on Windows, so there's a new folder button, and I'm going to give it an appropriate name. So I'm going to call it Project 1 Stopwatch, and would recommend you do the same, particularly if you're not too sure on the coding process. We always follow the instructions to the T, and then we can start to change things later and see how it affects our solution. So all of our files are going to be saved inside of this folder. So we need to create a file. So I'm going to do that by going in my Visual Studio Code or your text editor of choice, creating a new text file, and then straight away, the first thing we always do when we create a file is we save it so that we then have access to it. So I've just got to navigate my way to the folder, and we're going to call this file main.py. So the .py is important because that tells Visual Studio Code, tells the computer that it is a Python file. All right, and I guess if you've already set up Visual Studio Code as per our instructions, you should have the Python extension. So it will help with text colorization and picking up errors and that sort of thing. So now we've got our folder set up, we've got our first file in there. What we're going to do is we're going to build the basic Kivy application template. So anytime that you're creating an application using the Kivy interface elements and Kivy interface library, you always want to create an app. So basically the app is the window that pops up on your screen. So there is a few steps to this. We'll go through it one by one. The first thing we want to do whenever we're using Kivy as part of our Python code is we need to import the Kivy package. So it's a pretty simple line of code. We just say import Kivy, and that tells Python that, okay, we need the Kivy package available in our application because we're going to use elements within it. So the first element of Kivy that we're going to use is the app object. And as we said, the app object is the actual window that holds all of the elements and what we actually see on the screen. So on the next line, we're going to say from kivy.app import app. So from Kivy, so the package.app, so from the app library, we're going to import the app object. And you'll notice the difference between the library and the object is the object is capitalized. All right, and you'll see as we go through and we create our own objects and do that sort of thing that we'll use that capitalization standard so that it's easy for us to tell the difference between an object and a variable or some other sort of data structure. So once we've imported that app, we can actually create an instance of the app. So we're going to create an object, and the keyword in Python for creating objects is class. All right, I'm going to call this stopwatch app. All right, so again, the wording is important. We'll talk about why in a bit. And then in some brackets, we're going to put the app objects. What we're saying is that we're creating an instance of the app that we've imported from Kivy, and we're calling it stopwatch app. So for the time being, we can just use pass as a placeholder so that we can go and code elsewhere. You'll notice if I leave it off, because I've got the Python extension, it's telling me there's an error saying there should be something in here. And saying that, we will add a method. So we want to use the pre-built method called build. So build is already part of the app object as a method of the app. So when we say build, or defining the build here, it knows that, okay, this is us putting something inside the application window. But at the moment, we're just going to leave it blank until we've actually built something to put in there. The other thing you'll notice is the word self, and this will come up a lot. So particularly if you haven't done a lot of object-oriented coding before, the word self can be a bit confusing. But basically what this refers to is how we refer to the object within this method. So if we're talking about for this object, we're saying we use the word self. So we're saying for ourselves, being this object that we're performing this action in, this is what we want to change about it or do with it. So if you've done JavaScript before, they actually use the word this, and some people prefer that. But Python goes generally with the word self. So again, we follow the tutorials until we get the understanding, and then we can start to tweak from there. So once we've got our build method in there, the only other thing we need to do is to call an instance of this application object. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a little line of code, if double underscore, or dunder for short. So if dunder name, we double equals because it's an if statement, and as part of any condition, we use double equals. Single equals is only for assignment of variables or values. So if dunder name is equal to, and then in quotation marks, we put dunder main. And then inside that if statement, we're just going to say stopwatch app with the brackets dot run. All right, so just breaking this bit of code down, if dunder name equals dunder main is basically just a little condition we put in to say that, we can only run this application if we're in the main.py. So maybe, as you develop your skills, you may want to incorporate your stopwatch app into a bigger program. You don't want it to run the application when you're running it within the bigger app, right? Because it'll pop up with the big app, but then it'll also pop up with a window with the stopwatch app. So this is just a little condition we put in to say, well, it's only if we're running it in this file that we want to run it. And the .run method, again, is another pre-built method within the app object. So what we're saying is for this instance of the app that we've created called Stopwatch app, we want to run it. So it's going to build whatever we've told it to build. At the moment, that's nothing, but you'll see once we save our work. So I just press Control S on my keyboard as the shortcut to save. Go file save if you need to. That's, the most important part of coding is remembering to save your work. But I guess when you're testing regularly as well, it will prompt you because you'll notice the changes don't work if you haven't saved. But now we've got ourselves our basic template. We can actually test this out. So we'll click the play button in Visual Studio Code, and it's popped up in a different window. But you'll now see that we've got an empty window, nothing in it, but we actually have a window, which means that we've successfully created our Kivy app template. All right, so now we've got our Kivy app template, we can start to look at adding in some interface elements. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to create an object which holds all of the elements, and we're going to put that inside of our app window. So we're not going to put them all in our build. And you'll see why as we develop more complex applications, it makes more sense to have separate objects for interfaces. But for this one, we've only got a simple one screen interface. We could do it in here, but as I said, it's probably good practice to create your own object that holds it. So for this particular interface, we're going to take advantage of an object called a box layout. So this one has a little bit of a longer pathway to import it from. So you can see it's from kivy.uix, and uix is just a range of user interface tools. And the one we want in particular is the box layout. So we're going to import the box layout object. and then we're going to create an object which holds the interface elements. I didn't want the capital W, called Stopwatch, and we're going to say that it's a box layout. And again, we're just going to pass at the time being. We haven't got anything in there. We're just creating the placeholder for it. So the box layout, there's a few different types of layouts, and we'll explore some different ones throughout the course. But a box layout simply just puts elements within a box. So it's really good for grouping elements together. So in this case, we're just going to use it to group all of our elements that we want for this interface, and it will sort of just divvy it out nicely on the screen. So once we've got that set up, we now want to actually start putting interface elements into that. And to do that, we're going to actually use a Kivy file. So think of a Kivy file a bit like the relationship that CSS has to HTML. So HTML, if you've done web development before, is what holds all the content of your page. The CSS is the style that you've applied to it. So in this case, the Python is, these are the objects that we've got. All right, but what they look like on the inside is determined by our KV file. So what we're going to do is create a new text file. As I said, normally you'd set all this up at the start, but to try and not overwhelm people, this one will start with the first one, and now we'll do the second one. So once again, we've created a new file. The first thing we'll do is file and save. Make sure we're in the same project folder, so project 1 stopwatch. And we're going to call this stopwatch.kv. All right, and again, the naming is super important, and we'll discuss why in a bit. So what we're going to do in our stopwatch app is we're going to add 3 buttons. So one to start the timer, one to stop the timer, one to reset the timer. And then also we're going to have a label that will actually display the time for us. So the first thing we need to do is add our stopwatch in our angle brackets, and you'll see it comes up green. It gives you this error, potentially. If it does, it's not actually an error. It's just one little formatting thing that it seems to like, is if you put hash symbol, colon, and then the Kivy version that you're using. So hang on, what's happened there? Oh, didn't want the space. So yeah, so if you put that at the start, that message goes away. It should still work without it, but I guess again, it's good practice to put that in. So I just thought I'd explain that for people who might be getting that error and can't work out why. It's not necessarily an error. So we've got our stopwatch object in here, which points to this object in Python. So what we're saying is anything that's inside of this in the KV file goes inside of the box layout object that we've created. So we'll define a box layout. And so what we're saying is this is actually a box layout within a box layout. So what this is going to give us is the 3 buttons down the left-hand side, because we're putting them in their own box, and then the label will appear on the right-hand side. So with our box layout, we want to set the orientation equal to vertical. It's basically the same, put the elements one under the other. So then we want a button. And so the first thing to note is the indentation is important here. So we're saying the box layout goes inside the stopwatch element, which is another box layout, but this button goes inside the box layout, and then the text, which goes inside the button. So for the first one, we're just going to say start. All right, we want to add 2 more buttons. And so you'll notice here as well, as I'm going, I'm not taking the easy way out of cutting and paste or copying and pasting, because it's a button with the text. All right, I am typing it out because the big thing when you're learning, in particular how to code, is it's all about spending time interacting with the code. So you can see there, I just made a mistake. All right, but that's how we learn, is we learn to fix it by spending time interacting with it. If we copy and paste, we might not identify where we've made a mistake. All right, so then our label will go in. So this is going outside of the box layout. So that's why it's indented in line with the box layout. All right, so to start with, we'll just put some text equal to 0. And so it is important, even though that's a number, that it goes in the string, so in the quotation marks, because it's text. So we're outputting text. We can obviously calculate the number later on, but we still have to convert it to a string for it to be displayed. All right, so text size, we're just going to set to whatever size is ideal. So basically, as that number gets bigger, the size can increase. So that's actually wrong. It's self.size. There we go. I was trying to match that and that, but it is slightly different. So self means, the size of the label is the size the text can take. So then the last two, we're going to horizontally align and vertically align our label. So horizontally align it in the middle, vertically align it in the center. Oh, sorry, middle. Center and middle. I had that around the wrong way. So basically what that's going to do is just center it in the space that we have available for the label. All right, so Control S to save the stopwatch. So now if we want to actually see these interface elements in our Python file, in our stopwatch app, we have to actually get them into our build method. So what we're going to do is we're going to return the stopwatch. All right, so this is basically saying that when we build the app, we want to put this object inside of it, and then we've defined what goes inside of that object in our Kivy file. So if we save that, what I might actually do is I'll split the screen so you can see both bits of code at the same time. That's handy. But I guess to run it, you do always have to go back to the main.py. You can see there's nothing to run here in the stopwatch file. So we go back to our main.py, we run, and again, it opens up on the wrong side. But if I bring it across, you can now see we've got 3 buttons: start, stop, reset, and our label, which has just defaulted to the size. So we can obviously make this bigger if we want, but for testing purposes, this is okay. All right, so now we've got our interface set up. The last thing we want to do is to add some functionality. So obviously we want these buttons to work: start, stop, and reset. And also, I guess, getting the buttons to work, I suppose. So I guess we need to actually create the time, get it going, and then, things like stopping the time, resetting the time, that sort of thing. So in order to do that, we are going to make this a bit bigger first, but we are going to use another Kivy object. So again, this is one of the reasons why we use Kivy, is it has so many pre-built options, or objects, I should say, that we can access. So for this one, we're going to use the object called clock. So we import that from the clock library in Kivy. So in our stopwatch, because this is where I guess we're going to have everything happen, maybe in a bigger application, you would create a separate object for the action and then just import it. But because this is such a small application, we are just going to do it within the stopwatch object. So it's going to have interface and obviously our functionality. So what we're going to do is create a number. We'll just start with 0. So I guess we always start the timer at 0. And then with that number, we're going to do 2 different things. We're going to look at incrementing time. So create a method called increment time. which has two parameters, self and interval. And so the interval is important because we want the clock to update at a certain amount of time. So in this case, what we want to do is we just want to take the self.number. So what we're saying is within the stopwatch object, the number attribute, which we've already defined as 0, and we're just going to add 0.1 to it. So number equals 0. When we run this method, it's going to increment it to 0.1. Next time we run it, it'll increment to 0.2 because it'll already be 0.1. And we're plussing another 0.1, and so on and so forth. So with that as well, we want to create a different method called start. And this is where we actually run it. So clock.schedule interval. And so this is the interval that we're referring to up here, if I can spell it correctly. So what we're saying is we want to schedule an interval, and we need to tell it two things. We need to tell it what we want it to do every interval and how long that interval is. So we're going to say, well, we want to run the method within the stopwatch object called increment time, which is the one we just defined. And we want to run it every 0.1 seconds. So this interval gets put into this parameter, all right, to say, okay, well, that's the interval. All right, let's run it. So schedule interval means we're scheduling it to every 0.1 of a second, run this method, which just increases our counter by 0.1. All right, so that's the first thing we need to do is actually to build that in. Why is it giving me an error? Expected. Oh, okay, yep. Did forget the colon there. So again, it's very important, or I guess very helpful to have the Python extension in. It's not essential, but it definitely makes life a lot easier. So make sure you put the colon in after the function definition. All right, so now to actually get this running, we need some sort of action. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the start button. So in our button underneath the text, we're going to add another attribute called on_press. And we're then going to say that when we press the button, we want to run the root.start. So root is, I guess, similar to self, but it's basically referring to the base object. So in this case, the stopwatch object, the start method. So within stopwatch, the start method that we've created. So it's similar to self. Self in this case would actually refer to the button. So if we said self.start, we'd be looking for a start method within this button, which we don't have. So that would create some issues. So yeah, so that, like we've used self down here, it's referring to the actual label. So now we've got the button to start. Oh, clicked in the wrong thing here. Didn't save. So make sure you've saved both things. You can go file, save all if that helps. All right, but if we run this now, I've just got to restart it because I didn't close it before. If we press start, nothing happens on screen. All right, our timer is incrementing, but we cannot see it. And that's because we need to actually change our output to match this number. So there's two things we need to do in order to achieve that. The first thing we need to do is we need to adjust our label. So what we want it to do is we want it to be a string of root.number. So if we just put root.number, that would be an integer or a floating point number because it's going to be 0.1, 0.2, and so on. So it'll have a little meltdown. So we use the string method, str, to basically convert this number into a string so that we can output it. And then because we're accessing this number object within the Kivy file, if I just Control S the KV file, what we need to do is we actually need to change this number from a fixed value to what's called a numeric property. All right, and so you'll see it comes up with the squiggly line saying there's an issue. And that's because we need to actually import that numeric property from Kivy. So from Kivy.properties, we want to import the numeric property. All right, so once we've made those two changes, I think we should now have a functioning timer or stopwatch. So we hit start, and you'll see the number goes up. It goes a little bit weird with the decimal point, but we can fix that. All right, but at the moment we're worried about function over fashion. We've got ourselves a functioning stopwatch. So at least we've got the start button working. So now we want to look at the stop button and the reset button. So again, similar to what we've done before, we're going to create a couple of new methods. All right, I suppose they are wonderfully called stop and reset. So again, if you just want to set everything up, you can use pass as a placeholder until you're ready to deal with it. So the stop function is actually quite simple. It's just using from the clock method, clock object, we want to unschedule the incrementing of time. We don't have to put an interval because it just stops it. So it looks for the scheduled increment time and just says, okay, stop that one. With reset, I guess what we want to do is obviously stop it first. So we'll just say self.stop. And then we just want to reset the number to 0. So self.number, so this number that we display here will just be back at 0. All right, and obviously we need to attach these methods to the button. So we do on press. And again, note that it's looking very similar, but I am typing, I'm not copying and pasting. I'm spending time interacting with the code. On press root dot reset. So save that, save that. All right, so if we run it now, I'll bring it over so you can see. So we start the timer. All right, we stop the timer, it stops. We start the timer, stop. We can also reset. We can start the timer, and we can also, reset the timer without stopping it. But we now have ourselves a functioning stopwatch application. In terms of, some things to fix, you'll notice the numbers are a bit crazy. See if you can adjust that for yourself. Have put a little link on how to do that in the QLearn course, so help yourself to that. See if you can then adjust it to do 2 decimal places with the timing. Have a play around with the interval. There's the big hint there. There's also another little bug that is included in there, where if you press the start button multiple times, it will continuously speed up. So basically it creates multiple increments, which creates a bit of an issue. So have a think about how you could fix the code so that it won't, run multiple starts. And then the last one is if you get all that sorted and you get like a bug-free app, looking at including a lap timer. So basically just having another label where you list the times when you press the button to sort of show like lap times. But those are more of a challenge for you to have a look at. Obviously, if you get stuck, you can ask your teachers. But I guess once you've got to this point, you've got yourself a successfully working stopwatch app.